Mission to Margin is the business of healthcare.
The example I would give in the Southeast was 9 months after the implementation of the partnership, being able to actually look at the income statement and see the cost out. Yeah. But satisfaction from the team on the ground, from the client's perspective, was improving, and they felt like quality was improving as well. So being able to say we're achieving this cost out initiative, but by the way, our satisfaction from our employees and from our patients are going up. To understand the business of healthcare is vitally important, not just the clinical aspect, but it's again back to the triple aim or quadruple aim of understanding how patient experience, or I would say consumer experience, relates to quality, access, and affordability. And that's something that not everybody walks in the door and has.
A good understanding of what that new competency model looks like is an area that we feel is extremely important, and what the proficiency level of each of those competencies is. And then being able to develop or have a platform that helps you develop the individual, not the group or the role, but perhaps down to the individual level based on a clear assessment of their knowledge and capabilities, right? And having a platform that can serve up that development at an individual level.
Health systems, where we spend 1/3 of the U.S. healthcare dollar, are under pressure to reduce costs, both because of price compression and fee-for-value payments. Some systems are partnering with their largest suppliers through shared risk arrangements, transforming traditional supply chain price and market share negotiation into innovative long-term collaborative arrangements with buyer and seller sharing incentives and penalties driven by AAA metrics such as patient engagement, cost, and quality. Today we speak with Joe Gasque, a senior leader from GE Healthcare's North American operating unit, about the results they have begun to achieve in shared risk arrangements and the impact on how they hire, train, and deploy field team members. Brad Ansley, founder and director of SPI Health, returns to talk about preparing team members for this new value-driven paradigm. Joe Gasque, Brad Ansley, thank you so much for joining us today on the business of healthcare.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Joe, your organization has pursued share risk contracts. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, what we have come to realize, number one, is how do we become the leading provider of outcomes for our clients? And as we look at the equation of cost, quality, and access, we actually have 600,000 covered lives that we support. So we know the cost equation well, or we think we have perspective there. So how do we work with our clients to create shared need and figure out how do we bend the cost curve together? And so decrease cost, increase quality, and therefore, in essence, we work on access together. So that's really a journey that we started a handful of years ago, and are continuing that today.
And I think that's really interesting the way you described that. You described it as delivering outcomes, right? Not delivering imaging equipment, not delivering the other products and services. And I would assume that's a very purposeful phrase.
Correct. And surely we have a lot of clients that's the relationship they want. They want to buy our products and do the typical model, if you will. But where we've started to really push on is, number one, making sure that we're engineering and developing products that produce an outcome. They don't just have the best technology for technology's sake. So really drive after the outcome of the triple aim or quadruple aim. But then two, which clients do we want to work together on to go after an equation together and share risk on that.
And I would imagine that there are times when a client says to you, yeah, I want to go at shared risk with you, but you look at their situation and perhaps think to yourself, I wonder if this is the best client to take that on with.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because everybody is different in their journey of moving towards outcomes. And one way that we look at it is basically, as providers are taking on more risk, how do they mitigate that risk? And we're a source for being able to mitigate that together. But I would say where they're at on that journey is different. So their readiness is different.
Yeah, that's where we see some of the challenges and changes as well, is that customers are at different places in their journey, and some are really looking for that full portfolio solution. In fact, regulatory issues are really pushing organizations to look for that solution. And we see that from a seller's perspective, in that the focus really shifts from product sales to solution. You know, what's the solution, the patient-focused solution that's going to drive the best outcomes? It sounds like that's exactly what y'all are looking at.
Correct, and I think that can be done in a small example and not have a very comprehensive kind of partnership arrangement, all the way up to, you know, doing 10 plus years, you know, commitments to each other on creating that shared value together and really aligning around the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Takes time to assess where that client may be so that we can baseline the outcome, so that takes a little bit of time. So it kind of can be a point solution all the way up to a long-term committed relationship.
Brad, take a moment and talk about SPI Health and the work that you do.
So SPI Health is Sales Performance International's dedicated life sciences practice, and we've helped some of the world's largest medical device and pharmaceutical companies really adapt to the change, challenge, and disruption that's going on in the healthcare market, and some of the things you were alluding to, right? And we do that by helping them drive sustainable and measurable results by increasing their performance and developing their performance throughout a set of competencies.
And give me an example of one of those projects.
Sure. So a division of a large device organization didn't have a unified buyer-aligned sales process. So we came in and helped them really look at how their buyers bought in today's marketplace, and that's changed over the last few years. And so by developing that buyer-aligned sales process and then distributing that and really embedding that in the sales force over the course of that whole division, we actually saw we were able to help them change their problem from not being able to hit revenue targets to actually hitting double-digit growth. And while the other two divisions that did not deploy were flat to low single-digit growth.
Interesting. And Joe, if you could, take a few moments and talk about the work that you do within GE Healthcare.
Sure. So I lead marketing and what we call commercial excellence, a little bit around how do we show up is great partners for our clients. And on the marketing side, it's of course, how do we look at the value creation across all of our different portfolios, but then what does the next 3 to 5 years look like? So a heavy emphasis on strategy that we surely don't have all the answers for, but we're constantly trying to work with colleagues and providers and payers, frankly, to figure out what does the next 3 to 5 years look like, so we can always try to bring contemporary thoughts to our clients to achieve outcomes.
And when you think about the portfolio of products that you represent for GE Healthcare in the marketplace, give us a sense of that range and scope of portfolio.
Sure. Maybe I'll start with our life sciences business, because that's often the one not as well known. So we're overall a $20 billion company. $4 billion of that is our life sciences business. Heavy in the biopharma manufacturing space. In fact, 8 out of the 10 biopharmaceuticals that are produced with our biomanufacturing equipment.
Interesting.
And our value prop from pharma is around how do we take 50% of the time out of the equation and reduce cost by 50%. Because we know that bringing a drug to market 1 month sooner is $300 million to the equation. So that's a big part of the focus. The other is around cell therapy. So cell therapy is fast evolving, and what our part in that is around the industrialization of cell therapy.
Just take a moment and explain what cell therapy is.
Sure. So in the lymphoma example, it's taking the white blood cells out of a patient with lymphoma and basically then growing those in a lab, and then so versus a bone marrow treatment, a replacement, taking their own white blood cells, growing those in a lab, and then injecting those back into the patient. Great results there, and the possibilities are almost endless. That's just one example.
Right.
So very early stage, but something that we're very excited about. So that's the life sciences piece of our business. The other is on the diagnostic side of our business, which is really around what folks may know us for, imaging equipment, ultrasound, diagnostic cardiology, for instance. And then another big part is on the monitoring and therapy side. So how are we monitoring patients more in the acute care setting today, but as we look at outpatient to inpatient and then in the home, how does that transition? And so looking at that, and then we have a very healthy digital business that kind of works across all of that space. And last but surely not least, and a big part of our partnerships around outcomes is around our services franchise. So how do we make sure that we're helping our clients achieve the uptime that they're looking for, the utilization they're looking for out of the assets that we're working with them on?
When you think about the transition in the marketplace to value-based care, what sorts of things do you see organizations having to do in their sales force to adjust and be prepared for that?
Instead of having individual stakeholders, now you have multiple stakeholders and multiple decision makers that require sellers to have different competencies now and different proficiency levels of those competencies. So think about now a seller having to understand a whole organization and all the stakeholders in that organization and how one decision may impact across an organization where you've got a clinical side and an administrative side. And they've got to be situationally fluent to be able to speak to a solution that works for the whole organization and provides patient outcomes, strong patient outcomes and cost savings.
And this is a world that you're living in today. You've got 5 or more clients where you're in some sort of shared risk relationship. You are in the depths of fee for value.
Right. Yeah, I think on the competency side, I'd mention what Brad's talking about. Even with the clients where we don't have a committed relationship in place, we have to be deep from an expertise standpoint in a clinical care area, for instance, about how a particular technology can bring outcomes, the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, not that we think that the device achieves. So we have to be deep clinically, but then we really do have to have folks that can kind of sit across all of our product lines and be that one point of contact for our clients. Account executive, for instance, they can be deep and understand goals, strategies, and initiatives of the client, and then make sure that the expertise of the product teams are doing the right things to help achieve that. So we kind of need both. Right. And then as we move forward, what does that mean competency-wise? It's systems thinking. How do we understand what systems thinking looks like? Problem-solving skills are crucial for the expertise that we're looking to bring into the organization. And then, something that maybe isn't, I would say, profound, but just the hunger for knowledge. Right. And a curious learner.
I call it, have an insane curiosity for how you can help your potential customer, right? And how what impact that might have on their clients, their patients, really. So that insane curiosity is key. And it's interesting. You mentioned a lot of competencies, and what we've seen is this shift shift to a more business-to-business type sales model from previous. Are you finding the same thing?
We sure are seeing the business to business. To understand the business of healthcare is vitally important, not just the clinical aspect, but it's again back to the triple aim or quadruple aim of understanding how patient experience, or I would say consumer experience, relates to quality, access, and affordability. And that's something that not everybody walks in the door and has. But each day, how are we trying to learn that? But then also what are we doing as GE Healthcare to provide the food and water so that people can grow? But what do they do on their own? If they're not doing that on their own, then they'll be left behind. So that's the type of competency and talent that we look for as well.
Since you've been on this journey, do you find that you've more changed your hiring criteria, looking for the raw talent that can support this shift, or have you focused more on the learning and education and training that you deliver to your teams?
Matt, it's a great question. Brad, I love your perspective. We've really tried to do both. It's how do we attract, retain, and grow the best talent we possibly can. On the attract side, we are looking for some different competencies. We do hire heavy engineering mindset and skill for the problem solving and critical thinking. But the business, we find in specifically recruiting out of school or master's programs, that the business side is so vitally important. So, being able to kind of make sure critical thinking is there, but the business equation is there as well. But then, as we look at the talent that's already on the team, how do we help them grow in these areas that we're talking about? So really two-pronged approach on the front end, and then also once talent's in the door, how do we help them grow in these competencies? One of the big things, we've always been kind of a device seller, if you will, heavy device seller, capital equipment. We're moving heavy towards software.
Right.
So software as a service is a large part of our offerings now. That takes a little bit different skill set than selling an MRI machine. So we continue to have to push on that to be able to balance both.
Right. Yeah, and what we see is that there is a changing competency model out there, and organizations need to understand just what those changing competencies are before, as Joe said, before they go start trying to develop folks or even hire folks in with those competencies. So a good understanding of what that new competency model looks like is an area that we feel is extremely important, and what the proficiency level of each of those competencies is. And then being able to develop or have a platform that helps you develop the individual, not the group or the role, but perhaps down to the individual level based on a clear assessment of their knowledge and capabilities, right? And having a platform that can serve up that development at an individual level, provide them with a roadmap to mastery that is developed for them, then that certainly is going to be more efficient. And our belief is if you can provide that, you get quicker results in the marketplace. If we can decrease the time to productivity and the shift in those proficiency levels of certain competencies, whether it be account management, whether it be clinical selling, we can't leave out clinical selling at this point, but whatever it is, if we can decrease the time to productivity, then we help the whole system.
Let's talk a little bit about one of the shared risk arrangements that your organization has entered into. Could you describe one to me?
Sure. All of them are different. Again, back to where the client is in their journey and their need and value creation they're trying to achieve. And our attitude is we're not going to come in and one size fits all, and you have to do everything with GE Healthcare. It's really about assessing where that client is. So a few examples of that would be a 7-hospital system in the Southeast that was really looking for being able to take cost out of their radiology and service line strategy over the next 7 years is the commitment that we signed up for. And then also, how could we do that with telemetry and patient monitoring and improve quality of care? And in those scenarios, we agreed on the risk that we would go after together, the shared savings, if you will, and that's what we did. Where there's a large institution in the Northeast, Jefferson Health, where we've looked across as they've integrated several acquisitions. How could we help them in that integration journey, and really across their service lines and looking at care pathways. How could we help approach that, whether it's cost out from achieving a cost out goal for again across integration of services, or if it's on the quality equation.
So as you went on that journey with Jefferson, for example, and you settled on a shared savings amount that you were targeting together, what does the world look like after that agreement? What is the next meeting between that delivery team and that Jefferson team? What does that look like in action?
Matt, it's a great question. I think it goes back to Change Management 101, heavy change acceleration process of making sure the right stakeholders are on board, and making sure there's a shared vision. What are the roles and expectations of both parties, and really the combined party coming together, because we do work together as, call it, one team. And then what are the metrics that we're going to measure ourselves on, and what's the operating rhythm of how we're going to do that. So it's really the operationalizing the partnership, for lack of a better term. But the change management can't be overlooked.
I would find that a stunningly complex challenge to undertake, and it sort of, in my mind, I'm imagining sort of a team of dedicated and supporting personnel from GE, a leader from Jefferson and supporting team there. I would imagine the first thing is when those people meet in a room together to teach everybody that this is not a vendor-customer meeting, that this is a partnership meeting with a shared measurable outcome.
Absolutely. That's really what it is this is we're doing this together. Here's the goal we're trying to achieve that both organizations said that really we want to go after. And so then it's about how do we all get on board to go achieve that goal. And I liken it to, it's not that one organization is better than the other. It's just healthcare and healthcare costs, we know, continue to rise. So there's not one institution or organizations that are going to solve that. I think the ability to think that not invented here is no longer the mindset. So how do we partner in different ways to solve that problem? And by the way, we at GE Healthcare have partners with several folks from Intel and Apple to NVIDIA with smart chips to client partners to so on and so forth, because we can't solve this problem on our own. And that's really, I think, a big part of our message as well.
Is there a moment that's happened where that team or one of the teams sort of had that sense that they crossed one of those gates, that they had a measurable result that they felt really good about?
Yeah, I think the example I would give in the Southeast was 9 months after the implementation of the partnership, being able to actually look at the income statement and see the cost out. Yeah. But satisfaction from the team on the ground, from the client's perspective, was improving, and they felt like quality was improving as well. So being able to say we're achieving this cost out initiative, but by the way, our satisfaction from our employees and from our patients are going up. That early on starts to put some wind in the sails, if you will.
And you talked about some competencies in your hiring process: systems thinking, problem solving, a hunger for knowledge. I would imagine that those are sort of qualities that come with the human being that you can sharpen, but they're very fundamental characteristics of who you hire. What would be another example of a competency that you have to teach?
I think it's you can learn this, but it's a little bit ingrained as well, is around living in ambiguity. So the world is changing so fast, as we all know, that even if you come from a place where you're structured in the way you go about life, and if something changes, your ability to flex and move, but you can learn that. A quick example is went to a leadership course through that we led at GE, and executive leaders all coming for a 1-week course, and there were no agendas. So, and they specifically said, you're so used to your daily calendar that we're not going to even give you an agenda. Here are themes that we're going to cover today. And the next day, here are themes that we're going to cover. And it was teaching us to live in that ambiguity. As a small example, but that's a big competency that we look for, not only in the individual we're trying to attract, but then also how do we teach that?
And I imagine that helps with the ability to think through the problems that you're trying to help solve for your clients. And that I can't grab the water right now, but I can certainly analyze it and look at it and see where are some potential opportunities to make changes, instead of being so focused on one particular typical way of doing something. I imagine that helps with that problem solving.
Absolutely, and having different people at the table to look at it. So the diversity of thought is crucial. Absolutely.
Yeah, in today's healthcare market, it seems like that's what we see healthcare customers are looking for, is how do you help me solve a problem? Great, I understand your product line, but before your sellers even get there, they're already way down the path of understanding what your capabilities are. Now it's, how do you help me solve a problem or increase outcomes or decrease cost of care, or all three? And what resources do you have? What resources? GE is a big company. What resources can you bring to bear? You were talking about that account manager earlier that kind of has to see across the whole spectrum. How can you bring the considerable resources to help us achieve these outcomes? That's one of the big areas that we see, is how do you help somebody understand that? How do you help them gain that situational fluency to do that?
Right.
Is situational fluency the only competency that needs to change?
Situational fluency, in our definition, is actually made up of several different things. But if you look specifically at behavior-based competencies that are driving business in today's marketplace, that have changed over the last few years, we've already talked about account management, where everything's an account now with all the consolidation and the integrated delivery networks that you have, and everything is an account now. So sales representatives need to have that ability to understand an account at any level of seller. So that's one. To be able to have that broad conversation across both financial and clinical, they also have to be well versed in today's marketplace of the evidence that's available. The expectation that we see from healthcare customers is that they're looking for proof. Can you demonstrate using the evidence behind your product that this is going to help us solve a critical practice or patient issue? So they have to be well versed in the principles of evidence-based medicine and how to talk about clinical selling skills or clinical information, but also from a business perspective, how do we speak to a CEO? C-suite selling is becoming a very large part of what the skills that some of our customers are looking for. How do we differentiate those two discussions from clinician to a CEO or to C-suite? What's going to push the volume to value equation even further? And what are the levers that one needs to pull to help the customer?
Within GE Healthcare North America, how many of these shared risk engagements have you entered into?
Great question. I think our approach has been go slow to go fast. So in the last 18 to 24 months, we've entered into 6 of those relationships. And with, I would say, each one, how do we learn from that, making sure that we're doing what the client expects us to do, and what are the outcomes? So, what are the touch points every 3, 6, 9 months, making sure that we're achieving the shared goals that we have, and then we can take that learning and build off on the next one. So that's kind of where we are now. But where we're going, I think, to the earlier conversation around volume to value, as that continues to accelerate, which we surely believe that it will, the readiness by clients, we believe, will increase, and we think our capability is increasing with each one that we do as well. And so we think over the next 9 to 12 months, we'll enter into another 10 to 15 of those type of arrangements. The other thing that's kind of interesting too is the continued consolidation, and how does that look? Because so much, if you look at the big horizontal mergers that are taking place, that's going to take a little while for that to settle out and for integration to happen there. Before that's back to that client readiness, before they might be ready to say what's the next step on how do we achieve an outcome once we've come together in an integration. So that's that piece of it as well.
In these situations of developing a shared risk arrangement and then fulfilling a shared risk arrangement, how dramatic are those competencies changing?
I think dramatically, and I'd also say the title of the individual is probably going to change over time. Where today we have 2,600 sellers in the U.S. and Canada, and not saying that that's going to be less, but what we'll definitely do is we'll start to see a shift of customer success resources. So in long-term relationships, 7 to 14 years, you don't need sellers, walking the halls trying to talk about the next latest and greatest product. What we need is customer success resources, more consultancy, if you will, project management, clinical training or applications training to make sure that the client's achieving what we said that we were going to do. That might be achieved through a new product introduction or a new offering that we have, or it may not be, just depending on what the agreement is. So we think we'll see a bigger shift towards customer success resources over time as well.
With the introduction of fee for value and perhaps the acceleration towards it, what do you think that does to competencies?
Well, I think what you're going to see is a change in the competency skyline, if you will. And when we talk about competency skylines, we're talking about what proficiency level is needed for each competency. And over time, as Joe was mentioning, those are going to change. So while being able to be an account manager may need a high level of proficiency today, in 5 years, maybe that proficiency level drops and a solutions architect becomes a higher, the competencies behind being a solution architect become higher on the proficiency level. So you'll see that proficiency skyline, if you will, for competencies begin to change. And the implication that we see on organizations is to be able to monitor that and understand that, to have the capability to say, okay, here's where we are today, where's our customer going to be in the future, and where are the gaps? And how do we monitor that?
What would be an example of a competency that you both would classify as very important today?
I would have to say, and again, evolving to a higher proficiency level is, and I'll start with just account management as one.
So account management, and just for purposes, what do we define as account management?
Joe, I think you said this earlier, it's being able to look across the organization and understand what the goals and critical business and practice issues are across that organization, and then be able to solve for that to help the organization focus on patient outcomes in today's world.
I completely agree, and we see in our organization because around a large client or an integrated delivery network, we could have 30 to 40 sales professionals working with that client in some way, shape, or form. So that account management or account executive has to, 40% of the time or 50% of the time is making sure the internal team is aligned to what the client's trying to achieve. And then the other 50% is making sure that we're understanding the goals, strategies, and initiatives of the client to bring the portfolio to bear. Or, by the way, when it's not in our portfolio, how can we still offer a resource or an idea? So the influencing skills of that individual has to be extremely high. It's really a true leadership role without direct leadership responsibility, if you will, or direct people responsibility, because they have a team of 30 to 40 individuals internally that they're trying to all keep on the same track. So that's a big part of the competency that we look for in great account management as well.
This journey from fee-for-service to fee-for-value, what happens to a competency like account management?
It's going to be interesting to see. It's still going to be a necessary factor as the consolidations continue, and the goal of decreasing the overall healthcare costs and as a percentage of GDP continues to be a big part of what the aim is. So it'll always be there, but I think depending on how the marketplace reacts to this shift, this continuing shift, and in fact what I think is an acceleration to value, it could drop a bit, but it'll always be part of the mix, I would think. And I think that's not unlike other competencies in the skyline or in those critical competencies that are needed to succeed in today's marketplace.
You made a reference to Skyline. Talk a little bit about that concept.
So if one were to list all the 10 to 12 sales competencies that are needed to be a successful seller in today's marketplace, right? And perhaps have 4 levels of proficiency for each one of those competencies. And you were to set that bar for each one individually. So account management may be highly proficient. Clinical selling skills may be proficient, right? Or pick another competency. Any of them you may have just at average, right? Because it's not as important in today's marketplace. So when you put all those together and you look at them, those competencies side by side and those proficiency levels, they call it a skyline because it actually begins to look like a skyline as you see the different levels of competencies and the proficiency levels that are needed. And that's what you'll monitor over time to say, okay, how are the changes in each competency's proficiency level going to impact what an organization needs to accomplish and needs to do to develop their sales team to be most successful in today's market. So
the idea being that today, perhaps the senior sales leader for a large client might need a level 3 proficiency in account management, right. But as the trend towards fee for value accelerates, maybe they need a 4. Right. And so that understanding that helps you change who you hire and helps you train those people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It helps both, right? What's the hiring model that I'm looking for? But also, how do I shift the development of my team to meet the needs of today's healthcare market? So it really requires a monitoring of that proficiency level over time and have the capability to do that.
And I would imagine GE has a process for this, and talk a little bit about that.
So we do. I think, as always, we can get better in that process. But I think one of the things that we're really spending some time on is the individualized learning plan, whether it's from an expertise standpoint around a clinical area, the business of healthcare, influencing or leadership skills, and mapping out that personal kind of learning plan for them. But we also see, when we look at kind of how we deploy resources, what I would call vertical specialization and then horizontal differentiation.
Joe Gasque, Brad Ansley, thank you so much for joining the Business of Healthcare today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining the Business of Healthcare. You can find us at www.bohseries.com or by searching on Business of Healthcare in your favorite podcast app. Join us next as we explore early results from the federal grant program CCBHC, intended to increase behavioral health and primary care integration. Our videographer was Leon Parker, TJ Ingracia did post-production, and our research assistant was Sophia Aga. I'm Matthew Hannes, founder and executive producer of Business of Healthcare.